Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to give a list of some recommendations for if you are a fan of Rob and Hobb. Before I give my recommendations, if you'd like to leave some of your own, feel free to do so. First off, that way if anybody comes to this video, they not only have my list of suggestions, but yours as well. And then second, if you end up saying a book that I also end up saying, then don't worry about deleting your comment or anything like that, because that just provides further confirmation that there is a high likelihood that if somebody likes Hobb, they'll like these books as well. Before I jump into it, I do want to say that a while back I did a couple of videos where I was talking about books that are often considered, even though the term is up for debate, fantasy staples. The things that if you're looking for the best of the best among fantasy, there's a specific group of books that often get recommended. And I wanted to go through those books and provide examples of some lesser known works that I feel if you like this classic one over here, or if you like this one that you've seen recommended over and over and over again, then here's one that is not as well known that you could also potentially like. And if you are interested in seeing those, I'll have them linked. But I did say in that video when I talked about Rob and Hobb, because she is one of those authors, I said that I have a whole list of other books that I think a lot of Hobb fans would really like, but I was trying to zero it down and make sure that I got through all the rest and that it wasn't just zeroed in on Rob and Hobb. But today it's just about if you are a Rob and Hobb fan, you might enjoy these books. The first one I'm going to mention would be the Pariah by Anthony Ryan. So on surface level, I don't think that the plot line is similar necessarily. I do think that their writing styles both have this feeling of almost formality. At the very least, they do seem to have a very good command on the language, and I think that's very much incorporated into their works. I don't think that they're cheeky by any means. I do think somebody like in the book Gideon the Ninth, I definitely think that author has a good grasp of the language, and then the author will utilize it in a way where it can be really funny or it makes fun of itself. It'll be very posh and very polished, and then all of a sudden it'll be really stupid. And that's not necessarily what I mean. If you're a Hobb fan, you know there's just something about her writing that feels reminiscent of classic fantasy, but it's slightly more inviting. And the way the descriptions are done, it's not like pages and pages and pages of descriptions. It's just enough where you feel like your feet are on the ground, and it can really transport you. And I definitely think Anthony Ryan has that way of writing as well. It can, for some people, translate to the book feeling slow, but I personally like getting sucked into a world. I like it when it feels like everything around me is disappearing and suddenly I'm there with the characters experiencing what they're experiencing. So I think both authors excel at this. With the Pariah in particular, this is a story that follows somebody who was very much a part of a certain group. Something happens, there's an inciting incident, and then suddenly our character is finding themselves pretty much not being the main character, you could say. Even though you're following them, they are always caught up in the lives of more important people, we'll say. People who have a lot more power, people who have a lot more influence, people who are leaders among men, and people oftentimes that are even nobility. So you can see likely already how that can translate to being something you might enjoy about Fitz in the Farseer trilogy, or just in the realm of the Elderlings in general. Fitz is somebody who does not have a lot of agency. He does not have a lot of control over his own life. And I do think that while it seems like an unappealing way to recommend a book, there is just something about that that is very different from what you typically find in stories. When you find that person who is just a person alongside the stories of these supposedly more important people. I think that can be really gripping for a lot of readers. Ironically, I didn't love the Farseer trilogy, and I didn't love the Pariah. I do really like Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan, but Bloodsong I think is a little different, and I think its character is a little, it's not the same. So specifically the Pariah, although I do think if you like Rob and Hobb's writing, you might like Anthony Ryan's writing, but when it comes to that element I was describing about almost a lack of agency with the characters, specifically the Pariah to Farseer. Next up, we have Age of Assassins. So this one is just literally in its plot that they sound almost identical. So with Farseer, once again, returning to that, I know Rob and Hobb has done a lot within the realm of the Elderlings, but a lot of these, because people start with Farseer, is where I want to zero in on. But regardless, you see that the premise is that Fitz has ended up being somebody who they cannot allow him to ever have claim to the throne. And so it's sort of a keep your enemies close. They keep him very close. The nobility keep him very close to them so that he cannot try and ever rebel, take the throne for himself, anything like that. So that does mean they have a lot of control over his life. But what they decide is like, well, what if he were to serve us also? And so you see him learn to become an assassin. He is an apprentice, hence why it's called Assassin's Apprentice. And that is very much a part of his life. And then over in Age of Assassins, you follow somebody who has sort of a sad backstory with their childhood. They, as a young person, have now become an apprentice to an assassin. And even though they themselves do not necessarily always have direct contact with people in nobility, they are involved in some fashion through their mentor, who is somebody who is kind of sort of working for nobility. So the difference is in Age of Assassins, I personally liked the main character a little bit more than Fitz, to be honest. But also, I do think that you see a lot more mentor-mentee within Age of Assassins than you do in Farseer. So if you like Farseer, but you wish you got a little bit more of that specifically, then you might end up really liking Age of Assassins. Next up, we have the Goblin Emperor. I definitely find that Robin Hobb's works have a way of giving you the information that you need so that the story can make sense and that you can progress, but it always feels like there's actually so much more that you could tap into, that the world is really fleshed out, but she's just showing you a little snippet of it. And this comes down to the lore, the actions of certain countries and people in different places, and how those little things can trickle in, how it affects the economy. There's just so much that feels very well fleshed out, except you only get to see the world through the characters that you're following. And I think that is very true of the Goblin Emperor. This is a story that it is a standalone, but it feels very much like it is a standalone within a world. Like it branched out and was its own little thing, but it's actually a part of something greater. But in actuality, it's just a standalone. There are a couple other books in this world, but not in the way that I was just describing. It's not a Realm of the Elderlings situation. But you follow a young man named Maya who, through a terrible accident that has killed everybody else in line for the throne before him, he now finds himself becoming the ruler. And he doesn't really know what he's doing. And there are a lot of people that just want to control him. There are some people that want him removed. They want to put their own person on the throne. So he's, one, just trying to survive. Two, he's trying to figure out, was there actually something sinister that led to this tragic accident, or was it truly an accident? And then also, he's just doing his best. And he's so wholesome and so likable. But there is just so much that he is flooded with, that you, the reader, are flooded with, and you're just barely clinging on. And I really, really liked that reading experience quite a bit. It does mean if you're somebody who prefers to know the ins and outs of everything, the political landscape, the magic, the way in which there's different races of beings and everything that goes into their relationship, if you want all that, you're barely scratching the surface. It's there, I feel like. The substance is there. It's just you're not going to get all of that information to where you feel like you have a firm grasp. The whole point is that you don't have a firm grasp because that's going to tie you to Maya's experience. And I do think there are some parallels between that feeling and what you get in Robin Hobb's works. Next up, we have Mercedes Lackey. The entire Voldemar structure is somewhat similar to some of the structure of Realm of the Elderlings. I do think Realm of the Elderlings is a little bit more contained, actually, which sounds bizarre because there's so many books in it. But Voldemar, you'll have one group's story told within a trilogy or a standalone, and then you'll have a person who is mentioned, and then that lore will be explored in a different series. And I just think that idea is really cool, and I think that it is in some ways what has inspired a lot of authors that have come after Mercedes Lackey in their careers. Also, I just find that some of the ways in which the story is written, some of the ways that the characters are presented to the reader, their backgrounds, and just their plot lines and their arcs in general remind me a little bit of how Robin Hobb does hers as well. The next one might be the one that I think is the least liked, but I still wanted to mention because I do find that there are some fans of one author's works that tend to also like this other author's works, even though they're a little bit different, and that would be Joe Abercrombie. So obviously a lot of people start with First Law, then there are the standalones, and then there's the Age of Madness. Joe Abercrombie is a lot bleaker. I think he's a lot funnier. I think that his character work is a little bit more up my alley. But at the end of the day, character work is something that gets praised about Abercrombie's stories, and that is something that gets praised constantly about Robin Hobbs. You really feel connected to the characters, or at the very least you feel like their arcs are developed really well, their personalities are developed really well, and you're really with them through the story. It's not really the plots that propel things forward, it's the characters. And if you like that feeling, there's a good chance that you'll like both. Again, I think that Abercrombie leans more into the grimdark. Some people have actually categorized Robin Hobb's works as grimdark. I think that the Ship of Magic and just live ships in general, I think that one is a little more brutal with its storytelling, and you actually see more of a cast of characters, which is more similar to how Abercrombie goes about writing his stories. And so I think that there's more overlap with those specifically. If you're a live ship fan, you might enjoy Abercrombie's works. But if you're looking for that streamlined plot, that is not what either of these authors really are known for, and in that way I think the reading experiences are somewhat similar. And then last for today we have the Sword Defiant. Even though it's not maybe as explicitly noted, I do think that the character within the Sword Defiant is somebody who is struggling in some ways with purpose and even potentially depression. So the setup for the Sword Defiant is you follow somebody who was a part of the group of people who saved the world from the Dark Lord. And I find typically with that kind of a plot line, usually it's cheeky and it's fun. And this one wasn't at all. We're looking at this character years since they have accomplished this great deed. The people who he was alongside in this quest, they don't really all have relationships with each other anymore. They've all gone their separate ways. Nobody ever sees them as people. They just see them as these heroes who save the world. So it affects their interpersonal relationships. And they don't really know, specifically the main character, doesn't really know what he's doing with his life. But he also constantly feels on edge. Like there's something just around the corner. There is still a threat. He still has to fight. He still is fighting. He's kind of in that headspace constantly. He doesn't know how to enjoy the peace that he gave to everyone else. And I think that that deep character exploration is something that Robin Hobb does as well in her works, even though the plot lines are different, even though I think the Sword Defiant has much more of a classic fantasy feel where you have the elves and you have the dwarves and you have the Dark Lord. Even though you have these things that we've seen in fantasy, been there, done that, what the author is doing there is quite unique, but at the end of the day, it's still very tied to classic fantasy, so the worlds aren't quite the same. But that deep character exploration, especially when it comes to the character's mental health, I think both of these authors tap into that. That's it for some. If you like Robin Hobb, you might like these recommendations. Like I said, if you're looking for other well-known fantasy authors and you would like to see some recommendations of works that are maybe not as well-known, I'll have those other videos linked. And then once again, if you have your own suggestions, please feel free to leave them. If you would like to check any of these books out, I'll have them in the description bar down below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.